evening. Good evening, and welcome to Walking by Faith Mission Church's Wednesday Bible study. Today, we're going to go over the true story of the Red Sea and the crossing. So I would ask you, do you know exactly where Moses gathered everybody up at? Do you know the journey that they took? There are a lot of speculations as to what exactly happened, but we'll use the Bible and gathered up resources to find out the true story of the crossing of the Red Sea. It's been knocked down and cut down, saying that, oh, well, they had this wind that blew, and Moses took them over to marshes, which was maybe about 6 inches deep, and they wound up at Mount Sanai. Do you really know where Mount Sanai is? Is it in Iraq, where the Garden of Eden supposedly was? Is it in Egypt? Where actually is Mount Sinai? Do you know? Well, you're going to find that out today also. So, if you're prepared, let's go ahead and let's begin. And we're going to discuss the Red Sea crossing, the true story of assembly, journey, and the real location of Mount Sinai. First of all, we have to understand that Moses was chosen by God. Moses' adoption as the son of Pharaoh's daughter qualified him to the throne of Egypt at the age of 40. Now, his position and his positive free will toward God aroused his sympathies for his people, the enslaved race of the Hebrews. And he began to plan their promised deliverance. And you can read that in Exodus 2:11. And God also says it again in the 7th chapter of Acts. And just in case you happen to miss it 2 times, this is the 3rd time God says it in Hebrews, the 11th chapter, the 24th through the 26th verses, excuse me. One day, as it came to pass, Moses avenged the mistreatment of one of his brethren by killing an Egyptian who was beating the Hebrew really, really badly. Moses then when it became known that it was him who did it, he was forced to flee Egypt, and he went into exile in a place called Midian. Now, where is Midian? Well, according to history, Midian was the territory of people called the Midianites, and it was located just east of the Gulf of Aqaba in Arabia. So if you want to write that down and take a gander as to where that was, give you an idea where Moses went to when he was banned from Egypt for killing an Egyptian. I'll say that again. It's the territory of the Midianites, who were a people at the time, and there may even be some of them left today, located just on the east side of the Gulf of Aqaba, spelled Aqaba, and that's located in Arabia. Now, the Midianites were descendants of Abraham through a man named Keturah, Keturah. So by fleeing to Midian, Moses was kind of like fleeing to a safe zone out of harm's way, as the Egyptians were in control totally of the Sinai Peninsula. They had forts and temples, and there were even some inscriptions telling of mining operations that the Egyptians had there. Well, we all know the story. 40 years later, God appears to Moses in the burning bush and told him that he was going to be the one to bring Israel out of Egypt to the very mountain where actually Moses was tending his sheep. And if you read in Exodus 3, 2, and 12, it tells you, when you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall worship God at this mountain. So actually, Moses, he knew where he was going, and he knew the path back. So that kind of makes things easier. That's no different than you and I going to the local Walmart. We know where it is. We know how to get back home. That's just to give you an example, okay? Well, now notice that Moses was told to lead his people back to a mountain in Midian, and that's to the mountain where God first spoke to him at, okay? The mountain is called Horeb, Horeb. That's the name that it was called at the time. And we find this out from the book of Exodus 3:1, and also it's mentioned in 1 Kings in the 19th chapter. And besides being called Horeb, it was also called Sinai. And that is what the name that Moses told the children of Israel, that he was taking them to Mount Sinai. And you can read that in the book of Exodus. Now, this mountain is not therefore located on the so-called Sinai Peninsula, but it's located in Arabia. Now, where is Arabia? Well, we're going to find out later on in the study where exactly Arabia is that's referred to in the Bible. And if you want a quick reference on it, you can find it in Galatians 4:25. Okay. See, Sinai, Mount Sinai is the most misplaced mountain in history. And the traditional Mount Sinai today, with its St. Catherine's Monastery, actually is a phony tourist attraction. It actually is. The Sinai Peninsula is also misnamed even to today. You see, the true Mount Sinai is the 8,000-foot tall mountain called Jebel al-Lawz, which means the mountain of law. And it's located near the eastern shore of Aqaba in Midian, Saudi Arabia. Okay. So it was safe for Moses to go, and there's no evidence of Egyptian occupation there at the time. Since the biblical Mount Sinai lies in Saudi Arabia, then the crossing through the sea had to be across the Gulf of Aqaba, which is an arm of the Red Sea and not the Gulf of Suez. A lot of common people think that that's where actually Moses led them across, was in the Gulf of Suez. But no, it turns out that Moses took them through, and we're going to find out, an area through the sea, all right, across the Gulf of Aqaba, which is an arm of the Red Sea. If you know how the Red Sea is shaped, you'll understand it. If you don't, then when we finish this study, go get a map real quick, look at the Red Sea, and you'll see where the Gulf of Aqaba is. Now, what was the route that was taken during the Exodus? Well, we need to find out where was the city of Ramesses from which Israel left. And that's noted in Exodus 12:37. And it says, now the sons of Israel journeyed from Ramesses to Succoth, about 600,000 men on foot, aside from children. Now, there was a city with this name in Exodus 1:11. And Ramesses was also the name of the Delta region, which was the land given to Joseph's family to live in. And a portion of this region was called Goshen, Goshen. And that's exactly where the people that came over with Abraham, with Jacob during the drought, they were placed in a place called Goshen because of Joseph's power concerning where he stood with the Israelites. So let's discuss the assembly area. Where was Succoth? Succoth, because that's the assembly area. And Exodus 12:37 tells us that. Well, with Succoth being the general assembly area for this tremendously large group of people and their livestock, some people have estimated which were based on good guesses, the number of Israelites anywhere between 275,000 and 400,000 people. However, if you read the Bible, we're told above from Exodus 12:37 that there were 600,000 men. 600,000 men. So then include the women and the children, and you have a very great possibility of being well over 1 million people. So can you imagine that the Egyptians had over 1 million people as slaves? Wonder how the pyramids got built? Well, probably a lot of people don't know what the exact number of the children of Israel were that the Egyptians were holding as slaves. You can do a lot of things with, 600,000 men. Well, back to Succoth, which is the crossing area. Egyptian documents mention a border station known as Jakku, and also another one named Tharu, located along the ancient Suez Canal, which connected the Gulf of Suez and the marsh lakes with the Mediterranean Sea. Now, this canal is known to have existed based on satellite photos. At the border, the point where one would leave Egypt properly, their boundaries, and go into the Sinai desert, there was a fort there. And in this area was kind of like a line of fortifications intended to keep the Arabs out of Egypt, the Bedouins, the ones that roamed the desert. The great fortress, Tharu, Tharu, was in this area, and it's often mentioned as the assembly point of great military expeditions to the north. In other words, when Pharaoh would go off on a journey, that's where they'd gather up at with his chariots and what have you. So here is where Moses organized this great mass of people and their possessions with all of their carts and animals, in addition to the treasures that they took with them, okay, for the march out of Egypt. Now, this is no simple task. I'm sure you can imagine that, all right? And Moses, okay, used his organizational skills that he learned as an Egyptian, okay, to organize the hundreds of thousands as he had done previously when he had to do with the Egyptian military expeditions, okay? So Acts 7:22 tells us, and Moses was educated in all the learning of the Egyptians, and he was a man of power in words and deeds. So in other words, what we're stating here is that Moses wasn't no dummy, okay? He commanded a lot of people, and that he learned from the previous Egyptians before him, all right, how to do this. So he had an idea of what to do, how to organize, okay? Now, here at Succoth or Tharu, he organized the largest army he ever had to assemble. Now, the result is stated in Exodus 13:18. Hence, God led the people around by the way of the wilderness to the Red Sea. The sons of Israel went up in martial, or a better word, militaristic array from the land of Egypt. In other words, there was order to the way that God had Moses assemble the people so that it wasn't a problem. And who knows better how to assemble over 600,000 people other than God. Now, the term went up in martial array, it's from a Hebrew as a verb, okay? It's translated as shamush, and it means to arrange in multiples of 5 and refers to a well-organized march. And in other words, what this is telling us is that it's not like it's just a huge mob that's fleeing as refugees, okay? In other words, God wants you to know, in understanding this journey, that things were organized, okay? And who better to organize? So then once they were organized and Moses let them off, where is the next location that they go to? Well, it's called Etham, Etham. Okay, and we find that in Exodus 13:20. They set out from Succoth and camped in Etham on the edge of the wilderness. Now, some points to note here. God prohibited Israel from taking the direct route to Canaan, which was the coastal northern route called the way of the land of the Philistines. In other words, they had some other people in existence at the time called the Philistines, and God didn't want the Israelites to go anywhere near them at the time, so they were prohibited from taking the direct route from Canaan, and that's why they wound up at a place called Ephraim. All right. Rather than so, God told Moses to take the southern route to Canaan, called the way of the wilderness to the Red Sea. Now, we're not told why, but I'm sure if you really study this, you can come to some conclusions. Now, this turned out to be when they left Egypt, okay, rather than go straight up across to the Red Sea, God had them go down on the southern route, okay? In other words, alongside of the Red Sea, rather than cross it in a direct path out of Egypt. And that was the southern route called the way of the wilderness to the Red Sea. Now, even though this was the longer route, it was pretty much well traveled by caravans and also a military road running along the east through to the northern Sinai Peninsula. In other words, Etham, where all of this gathering was taking place, was a region in mid to the northern edge of the Gulf of Aqaba. Okay, and how do we know this? It's because they were in Etham before they crossed the Red Sea, and they were in it after they crossed the Red Sea. Okay, so now we come to a detour. All right. So in other words, Moses has got them up, boom, they're on their way. Now we're going to get a detour. They're taking the southern route. Well, Israel did not continue on the highway to Canaan, but they were told by God to turn back. All right. And that's by way of a simple verb that's recorded in Exodus called shub, S-H-U-B. They were told by God to turn back and camp before a place called Pi-Hahithoth. Pi-Hahithoth. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, which was between a place called Midal and the sea. All right. Now, this maneuver by God was a ploy to lure Pharaoh into God's trap. In other words, the Israelites are now in a gap, okay, between mountains. They got the Red Sea at their back, and Moses leads them through this gap, and over 1 million people are spread out between these huge mountains with their back to the Red Sea. Are you getting the picture? Okay. Now, Pharaoh figured that the Hebrews were wandering aimlessly, that they were disoriented in the wilderness, and considering the path that they were committed to, they were really basically shut in. Okay. In the original scriptures, it uses a verb called sagar, S-A-G-A-R, which means to close or to shut up, just to give you an idea. Now, the verb suggests that the surrounding terrain hemmed in the Jews, and that is exactly the case. Because you see, as the new proposed crossing site chosen by God is going to demonstrate. All right, now stay with me. What was studied thus far and what we will see demands a crossing site, okay, somewhere along the shore of the Gulf of Aqaba. Now, there's a breach, a tremendous size of a breach on the eastern Gulf of Aqaba at a place called Nuwebi, which is noted on modern maps. And the only passage to it is through an 18-mile long wadi, which is a dried riverbed system. So in other words, what we're saying is that Moses, under God's directions, led the Israelites to between these mountains into a dry riverbed, okay, that would hold probably close to 1 million people, all right, with their back to the Red Sea, and they were all camped out in this dry riverbed, okay? I hope you're getting the picture, all right? Now, from their previous camping site earlier, which was on the edge of the city of Etham, they turned south and they entered this wadi, or this dry riverbed, and it must have seemed like an endless maze to them, with rugged mountains on their left and their right. And if you've been to the Grand Canyon or any other places like that out west, you can probably kind of get an idea if you ever stand and gaze into one of these canyons with the huge mountains of the Grand Canyon on both sides of you. Okay, so just imagine these huge mountains with a dry riverbed running through it, miles and miles and miles long. Okay, it must have seemed like they would never ever get out of there. All right, doggone, I lost my place. Okay. Now, the only path out of this dry riverbed, it empties onto an enormous breach. Okay, and it can be clearly seen on satellite maps if you got Google Earth. Okay, you can even see it today. Now, that's the only place that would accommodate close to 2 million people. Remember, the men were numbered at 600,000. Add the girls and the children in there, and you got a bunch of people. Well, on the north end of the breach are the remains of an Egyptian fortress, which is no doubt an old worship site that the Egyptians had for their goddess Hathor. Now, there's a place called Migdol, Midgol. It may be a reference to a watchtower atop one of those mountains, okay? Because it's documented that they flashed messages from tower to tower using reflected light. This is how Pharaoh was kept abreast of the children of Israel's progress. See? So in other words, when they left, Pharaoh sent out some spies after them. And now, between these two mountaintops in this huge riverbed where the Egyptians are sitting, up on top of the mountain, Pharaoh knows exactly where they are because we're being told that they're flashing back locations to keep Pharaoh in the gap of where are they, you know? Now, on the opposite shore, okay, which is about 8 miles into Saudi Arabia, precisely across from where they camp by the sea, is another ancient structure, which may be a Midianite fortress dedicated to the false god Baal, okay? And that can be verified if you go read Exodus 14:2. The phrase, what I'm trying to say is opposite it, seems to mean in respect to that particular body of water, okay? And this is setting up where Moses is going to take them across at. There wasn't no 6-inch deep marsh, okay? Now, of course, Moses knew this country like the back of his hand, being a military commander, and he was well aware of that, okay? So I'm going to ask you now, what is the Red Sea? All right. And back in those days, it was called Yam Suf, Yamsuph, Yam Suf. Well, the Red Sea is really, honestly, quite large, and it extends from Ethiopia and Yemen in the south part of it, and it separates northern Africa from Arabia, okay? And at its northern end, it splits into 2 arms, okay, which is the Gulf of Suez and the Gulf of Aqaba. Now, a verse that unmistakably demonstrates that the Aqaba branch is the part of the greater Red Sea is the first book of Kings 9:26. You see, because King Solomon also built a fleet of ships in a place called Ezion Geber, okay, there. And that's near a place called Eloth, which is on the shore of the Red Sea in the land of Edom. So in other words, it's pretty precise where they were, okay? Scripture indicates that the water they crossed was deep, not no little 6-inch marches, okay? And how do I know that? Well, God says this to us through Isaiah, okay? And if you go read in the 43rd chapter of Isaiah, in the 16th and the 17th verses, it was when they were mentioning it, it's called a path through the mighty waters, okay? Was it not you, O God, who dried up the sea, the waters of the great deep, who made the depths of the sea a pathway for the redeemed to cross over? Okay. And further on in chapter 63, when Isaiah is describing God, it says, who led them through the depths. Psalm 77:19 says, your way was in the sea and your paths in mighty waters, and your footprints may not be known. You did lead your people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. Exodus 15:10, your wind did blow and the sea covered them. They sank like lead in the mighty waters. So you see, in other words, what God's saying is you can believe what you want, but I got it all recorded down for you, okay? And if you're one of my children, I want you to know the truth, okay? It wasn't across 6 inches of water that Moses led the children of Israel, okay? In other words, it wasn't a shallow sea of reeds as liberals and conservatives for so long have affirmed. From speculation, that the Israelites had crossed the Gulf of Suez, names from the Exodus account were inserted on maps on the Bible by pure guesswork, okay? In other words, you can find some maps that are just pure guesswork saying, oh, here's where they crossed, okay? But truly, okay, charts show that the Gulf of Aqaba is really a deep trench with a canyon about 5,000 feet deep, if you want the truth, all right? You see, the western shoreline of Aqaba drops steeply underwater into this canyon at a slope of 45 degrees. That's pretty steep slope, okay? Which is really too steep for people to cross over. However, at the precise location, now this goes to show you the greatness of God, okay? At the precise location of a place called Nuwibia Beach, the deep trench is spanned by an underwater land bridge, okay? All right. And the pathway through the sea, all right, is estimated to be 900 feet deep and 2,700 feet wide. So you see the people that say, oh, no, there was a land bridge. There was. But what they fail to tell you is make people and deceive people into thinking is that, oh, yeah, well, it only had a foot of water. No, it was 900 feet. In other words, it drops off into a 5,000-foot canyon, okay, where they were hemmed in at between these mountains. But there was a land bridge there that God knew of, okay, that was, okay, at a depth of 900 feet. And also, all right, it was 2,700 feet wide, all right? Now, it slopes at a gentle angle of about 6 degrees underwater until midway across the sea, okay? It's some 1,000 feet deep below the surface of the sea. And from the Egyptian shore, then it slopes at a gentle angle of 6 degrees until, well, I'm not going to confuse you with all of that. Just know that there was a land bridge there and it sloped and then came back up. And of course, who knew that was there? Well, I sure didn't. I don't know about you. Okay. Well, midway across on each side, okay, I want you to understand this, that when God parted the Red Sea for the Egyptians to cross between these mountains okay, and the dry riverbed, all right, the walls of water were at least 1,000 feet tall. Now think about that, all right. It was not the land bridge was 900 feet under the water, and when God blew with his mighty breath and commanded, and the sea opened up, all right, the water on both sides of the Egyptians was 1,000 feet tall. Okay. Now think of a 10-story building, because you see in today's modern skyscrapers, each floor is considered 10 feet. So if you got 1,000 feet, that's 100-story building. That's as tall as Empire State Building. Okay. It's just awesome, the things that God did for the Israelites. All right. Now, you got to remember now, they dragging carts, they got flocks, they have their children, they have their women, and they got to move all of this, okay, across the Red Sea when God commanded that it open. So what were the physical requirements at the crossing site? Well, first of all, they were in this dry riverbed where it met this new Nuwibia beach, okay? And the way to the site was through something called a Wadi Watir, which could accommodate the multitude and also Pharaoh's pursuing army, okay? Now the Wadi becomes a hardtop road, all right? They were in the dry riverbed, but the Wadi is a hardtop road, which leads to this riverbed, and along comes Pharaoh, okay? So he's got a highway right to him. They ain't no worrying about breaking a chariot wheel or something, okay? The topography actually shuts them in, okay, as with the mountains all around them. Now, the undersea land bridge, now get this now, is both wide enough, about 2,500 feet across, and gentle enough in slope to accommodate everybody, okay? So let's answer some other questions, okay? Wasn't the site too far from Egypt? The answer is the distance from the Suez Canal to the Nuwibia, where they were, this dry riverbed, is about 210 miles, which is really not unreasonable considering, okay? If you read Exodus 13:21, which says, and Yahweh was going before them in the pillar of a cloud by day to lead them, and in a pillar of fire by night to give them light, okay, so that they could travel as much as they could travel 24/7, okay? So remember, God's leading them in a pillar. That's often, something aside when they're trying to discredit the Red Sea crossing. That's conveniently not mentioned, okay? So God knew exactly where he was going, all right? Well, the Hebrews, see, they were in excellent condition, I want to tell you, considering their life in Egypt under forced labor. You're going to stay fit, because if you don't stay fit, you die, okay? You just become another mouth to feed, and guess what? Boop, goodbye, you're gone. So they were pretty rugged and physical, okay? All right, so keep that in mind, okay? Israel had a significant head start also on Pharaoh's army, all right? And in 1967, in the Suez War that Israel had with Egypt, okay, a prominent Israelite, Moshe Dayan, he actually marched his troops from that very spot, the Nuwibia, to the Suez Canal in just 6 days, camping at night. All right. So I guess the question is well, why the detour? In other words, when they came out of Egypt from Sukkot, why not just go across the two little shallow arms, okay, boom, right into Arabia? Well, the answer is number one, to draw Pharaoh into God's trap. The second answer is to bring glory to God. Remember, all the things that he does are designed to bring him glory, okay? And the third answer to that, why this detour, is to bring Israel to the mountain where Moses was called, in Midian, back to Mount Sinai. So how long did it really take them to cross? Is another good question, okay? Well, Rabbi Sherwin Wine, who was the founder of the humanistic Judaism, claimed on TV that the event actually never happened because it would have taken them weeks to cross, is what he surmises. Okay. Now, crunching the numbers with the width of the underwater bridge being 2,500 feet wide and allowing 5 feet per person side to side would give space for about 500 people straight on across in a line. Okay. In other words, you got a line of 500 people with 5 feet between them straight across. That's how wide the land bridge was. Okay. So, with the length of the crossing being about 8 miles from side to side, okay, and if they traveled at 2.5 miles per hour, which you can probably walk a pretty good distance, so that'll give you something to judge by. It would actually take 3 hours for the front row, the people who first began, to cross over. All right. Now, allowing for half of these persons to be driving an animal or kicking a herd up of chickens and geese and who knows what other kind of animals they took with them, a quarter of the people would be in possession of a cart, okay, and that would require a procession of 9.5 miles or 4 hours walking time behind the front row. So the final row would leave the Western Shore some 4 hours after the departure of the front row. So in other words, what we're saying is that when the very first persons got onto this land bridge, it took 4 hours for the very last person to get on to the land bridge. Okay. All right. Now, it would take 3 or 4 hours to make the crossing. So the total crossing time, if you do the math, for 2 million people, which is a guess, plus animals and carts, would be about 7 hours. Now, even if 7 hours need some adjustment, it's still safe to say that the time needed to make the crossing was not really a long time. You know, we go to work in 8-hour shifts today, do we not? So you can consider it a one shift deal, and over 1 million people are across this land bridge, walking at 2.5 miles per hour. And believe you me, if you just came out of Egypt and you see Pharaoh's horsemen pursuing you, I think you're going to be a little motivated to walk 2.5 miles an hour. So you take that for what you want, but I guarantee you that's one of the greatest motivators you can find. All right. In other words, God didn't have to take out a stick and whoop them on the butts to get them moving. All right. Because Pharaoh had a pretty good sized army with him, and they were kicking up, I guarantee you, a good cloud of dust. Well, you can't be in a place and complain, that you left it. All right. I mean, proof positive that Israel was not in Egypt before they crossed. All right. Number one, the people's panic induced words to Moses that they should settle the issue once and for all. Exodus 14:11 says, "Is it because there were no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? Why have you dealt with us in this way, bringing us out of Egypt?" Verse 12. It's not the word that we, is this not the word that we spoke to you in Egypt, saying, "Leave us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians, for it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness." In other words, when Pharaoh shows up, all of the little non-believers, or those weak in faith, all right, they start in on Moses. All right. And of course, we find this later on out in the wilderness that this happens again. All right. Now, I'll be honest with you. My faith gets weak sometimes. I don't know about yours. All right. So I can understand being cooped up between two mountains in this dry riverbed, and here comes Pharaoh. All right. And all I see is water behind me, Pharaoh on the other side, and I sure can't climb this mountain quick enough to get out their way. So that's understandable. All right. And of course, it's all in the building of faith. And we have to remember today, these are the lessons that we really need to remember, is the fact that God builds faith in everything that he does for his people. He builds faith. All right. Can you imagine? Okay. Now here you are. I gotta sidestep this for a minute and throw this at you, because I gotta ask you. Can you imagine? Here you are. You got your wife and your two children. All right. You got your ducks and your cattle, and here you are in this dry riverbed between a couple of mountains, and all of a sudden, all right, nobody's told you how you're going to cross this lake. Yeah, this sea. You don't even know where you're going next. It's just camp down for the night, And along comes Pharaoh with his chariots. I mean, you got to lose a human being. If you had no experience with God before, I can understand your faith getting weak. But just try to remember this. This is the main lesson that personally I get from the crossing of the Red Sea. It's a circumstance that's a no-win situation. All right. And you're going to have some situations that come into your life when you put them in your mind, and you're going to say, don't see how this can be done. All right. But remember, God was leading his people. He didn't just bring them there and poof, say, oh, excuse me, I got to go home and check on a few things, and I'll be back in the morning. No, just like God is with us today with the indwelling of the Holy Spirit. God does not leave his people. So build your faith when you think about this and we understand this, okay? Build your faith. And I'm not going to go into the fact that, all of the people that Pharaoh had, like over 250,000 with him and so forth, etc. Okay. All right. And of course, we know what exactly happened to Pharaoh and the rest of them. All right. Now, I want you to know that there was evidence found in the Red Sea. Okay. All right. Of chariots and chariot wheels. Okay. They've been found. Okay. So now what we need to address is, once they got on the other side and Pharaoh was dealt with, where is Mount Sinai? Okay. Where did God actually want to lead the people to? Where is Mount Sinai? Will the real Mount Sinai please stand up? Okay. Well, the problems that exist with the traditional site that people are being sold is Mount Sinai, okay, is that the traditional site is not suitable for the amount of people that had to camp around. It's just not suitable. All right. Now, there was a Danish expedition, all right, in 1700s to find Mount Sinai, and they quickly came to the conclusion that the site was impossible. There was just no way that the place that was thought to be Mount Sinai could be Mount Sinai. All right. Now, since the Red Sea crossing was not carried out from Egypt, but after they left Egypt, this completely rules out a traditional site. Now, the Roman Emperor Constantine, he sent his mother, Queen Helena, to the Middle East in search of holy sites. Mount Sinai was one such location that she claimed to have visited, and she claimed this mountain, saying that this was where it was that the Israelites were brought to. And 200 years later, okay, in comes the Catholic Church and builds a monastery there, a monastery of St. Catherine, and allegedly visions and revelations appeared there. But actually, this is not Mount Sinai either. Okay. You can't put it past Satan to do his thing, to deceive. All right. And to be honest with you, that's probably what happened. So then, what are the clues that point to the true Mount Sinai? Okay. Well, Mount Sinai is closely connected with the land of Midian in the Bible. Moses fled from Egypt to Midian. Okay, he was at Mount Sinai in Horeb when he received the call from the burning bush, get up out of there and go get my people. God told him that the ultimate sign that God was with him would be when he returned him to this very mountain with all of the Hebrew people. That's what he told Moses. I'm going to bring you back here. I'm sending you, but I'm going to bring you right back here where you and I are talking. Okay? All right? Galatians 4:25 says Mount Sinai, was in Arabia. Okay? The name Horeb survives as a detailed map of the area, which shows that Wadi Horeb or the foothill region, okay, and all kinds of other places, all right? So actually, what we're going to find out is that Mount Sinai is located in Saudi Arabia, okay? And I can go into the area of the golden calf and where they were and all this other stuff. But for the purpose of this study, you just have to understand that if you track Israel's route from the Red Sea to Mount Sinai in Arabia, okay, there's a place that perfectly fits the description of a place called Rephidim, which is a stopping place along the way to Mount Sinai, there in the wilderness of Sin. And atop this hill towers a mighty rock about the size of a 5-story building. The total height of this formation, okay, that is Mount Sinai, is about 16 stories tall. Okay. All right. Now, this rock that was found in the desert, it's split through the middle, large enough for a person to walk through it. Okay. And here's the remarkable part. There are water erosion channels that come from the top of this hill out of the rock, which provides numerous evidence that there were streams that came forth from this rock out into the desert. And that's no doubt that that's the rock that God told Moses to speak to, but they were clamoring for water so bad they got him upset. He struck the rock, which is why he didn't go into the promised land. Okay. Well, this rock actually exists because it was found. Okay. It was found in the tracing the path to Mount Sinai. So I hope you learned something today. All right. I hope you kind of a little more understanding of the things that God does, and that they are all for His honor and glory, and that He never leaves His people. Remember, He led them in a cloud by day and provided light for them at night. How does this relate to you and I? He's with us today. God, the Holy Spirit's at home in the temple if you're sin free. Okay. And God is leading you. He knows. He knows the path you're on. He's seen it from eternity past. Okay. So don't feel like you're alone in the wilderness while you're alive in this world, because you're not. Okay, God knows exactly where you are. All right. And if you follow Him and praise Him and bring Him honor and glory, all right, He'll lead you just like He led the Israelites. Because we're told in the New Testament that we're grafted in with them. Yeah, we're not Jewish people. We're not His chosen people. But God, through His mercy and grace, and by the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, has grafted us into the tree of life with the Israelites and the Jewish people for eternity to come. Okay. All right. Well, glad you came along. It was nice having you. I hope you learned something today about the real Mount Sinai, and also the real journey that the people of Israel took, led by Moses, and how many of them there were, and just how great God is by taking care of them, that many people, leading them, guiding them, protecting them, and bringing them exactly where it is he desired that they go. Join us this coming Sunday for Humor in the Bible. If you don't think the Bible can be funny, well, join us this Sunday, and maybe you'll get your belly rolling. Who knows? All right. Join us. Humor in the Bible. Several spots in the Bible I think you'll find humorous, depending upon how it is you look at them. All right. God's got a sense of humor, I promise you. So join us Sunday for our service. And if you can't, pick it up during the week, okay, on WBFM.life. It'll be posted there, just like this Bible study here will be posted. So we'll see you Sunday. Have a great day. Thank you for joining us whenever it is that you do join us. If you're here live, we'll see you. God bless and keep you. And if not, we'll see you Sunday coming. 10 a.m. Eastern time, 10 a.m. service. I'm sorry, 11 a.m. Eastern time, 10 a.m. Central time. We'll see you at that point in time. Take care. God bless. I love you.